The likelihood of conversion is basically the value of a wish list, right? And so there's that common wisdom, which I assumed was true until we got this question and dug into it a bit, right? The common wisdom is that a wish list from 6 months ago is worth less to you from a conversion rate standpoint to a wish list that you got a week ago.
And that wisdom is not true.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 536 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, I'm the web programmer.
I'm Sam, but I'm not a programmer.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's August 27th, 2020 vibes. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net, whose monthly donations help keep this podcast going. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. So we're just working on update 1.3 for Crashlands 2, and we're just in the trenches right now. So rather than slog through all the nitty gritty weeds about all that, we're just going to go into listener questions on this episode. And we got some good ones.
Yeah, we were joking before, this might be like sort of a hot takes episode. So buckle up before it gets spicy.
It's our welcome onto YouTube as a platform. It's like join YouTube,
I guess.
Get some hot takes.
You gotta heat up those takes.
Yep.
So these questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net, and the highest upvoted question of today's episode comes from Flyhoppy Axe Rampa, who says, "Did you guys know about this?" And then linked us to a YouTube video.
Nice.
Which I'll just have to describe. And we'll probably put a link to the video in the show notes in the description. But the video features Rami Ismail, a well-known indie game developer, talking with some other devs. I actually didn't check into who he was talking to, but
it's some kind of a game dev podcast because I've seen those other two guys have shown up in my YouTube feed on occasion.
They're around
talking to somebody, but I never have dug in to be like, who are these guys? It's one of those. It's probably embarrassing that I don't have any idea.
Yeah,
who those guys are.
You call yourself a game dev.
But if you're ignorant enough, you'll never be embarrassed because you don't know what you don't know. And that's a good line to walk. Well, that's where we are right now.
100%.
So in this video, Rami is talking about wish lists on Steam. And it kind of kicks off with him basically saying, like, have you guys seen in the developer community, people are talking about how it's actually not a good idea to go after wish lists.
He said it's not great.
It's not
to get
great.
Wish lists. Yeah, to send people to get wish lists for your game.
And then he kind of goes into this claim that wish lists deteriorate over time. And in terms of
in Steam's algorithmic use of them, as in like the same wish list from the same person getting it 6 months before launch is much worse than getting that same wish list a week before launch or something like that.
Right. And so we saw that, and all three of us were like, I don't know about that.
I don't think that's true.
In fact, I think
so
we've seen
there's
by Steam and like by other people has said the opposite of that.
Yeah. Well, so there's kind of two parts to this. One is there's this common wisdom among indie game devs that wish lists deteriorate over time, not because Steam is like, hey, this is worth less because it was from 6 months ago, but because it's just like their logic thing. It's like if some random person, again, the same, like one person, wish listed your game 2 years before it came out, right? Mm-hmm. The chances of that person having some life thing change, just stop playing video games, forget about your game entirely and unwish listed at some point, whatever. There are all these things that can happen in between that and them being able to buy your game that could make it so that their likelihood of being a person who buys a game goes down versus somebody who wish listed your game the week before it launched. Not much has changed about what that person's up to in between those two things.
Yeah, right.
So you would assume.
Think about that as like the inherent value of a wish list then, as opposed to like algorithmic value, just so you know what we're talking about.
So the likelihood of conversion is basically the value of a wish list, right? And so there's that common wisdom, which I assumed was true until we got this question and dug into it a bit, right? The common wisdom is that a wish list from 6 months ago is worth less to you from a conversion rate standpoint to a wish list that you got a week ago.
And that wisdom is not true. It was very
turns
important.
out.
Or rather, it doesn't seem to be true.
Yeah. There's no evidence for it, and there is evidence against it.
Yeah.
So there's
So-
no evidence for it on the inherent side, being the idea that like within like not related to Steam's algorithm or anything like that, but within the wish list value itself, like a person, planting a flag in a game saying maybe I want to get this someday. That doesn't seem to be the case. That there's actually a deterioration in value happening there.
Well, the cool thing is this is actually a testable hypothesis because Steam's data gives you conversion breakdowns by month. As in they'll say like people who wish listed your game this month, this was their conversion rate, right? That's data that you actually have access to as a developer.
Yeah.
So we haven't dug into it for our own data, but Chris Zukowski put up a blog post earlier this year, I think in January, where he just dug into this exact question. And I think he only has one game, but it's a game that had a large number of wish lists and that had, like a 6 or a 9 month lead time between being announced and being launched. So he could ask the question, at least for like a 9 month period, is there any evidence that like those early wish lists had worse conversion rates than the later ones? And the answer is no. Like it was month by month. It's just like up and down within, you could compute an error bar if you wanted to across those things, but statistically it looks flat and there might
Except
be
for-
something there. Yeah. Except for month one.
People who wishlist your game in the first month that its store page goes up have a much higher conversion rate than any other group.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like if somebody wishlists your month 6 months ago or 3 months ago or yesterday, when that game launches, they all convert at a pretty similar rate. So there really isn't wishlist decay.
And the logic makes sense, right? Because who are the people who wishlist a game when it first becomes available to wishlist? It's people
Fans.
who are very active on Steam, so they're aware that games are coming out, right? And so there are people who are likely to buy games, eventually, right? And fans of the game who are also likely to buy it once it comes out, rather than people who discovered it and wishlisted it because they're like, ooh, I want to check this out once it's available or once it goes on sale.
Yeah,
Or
I
whatever.
do think it's an important note, which is that we had this question a couple of episodes ago about like big figures in game development and how their presence in this case like Rami affects like other developers or like just overall indies sometimes taking advice from people where that advice may not apply. Things like we know Rami, we're friendly with him. We chat with him plenty of times at GC. Smart dude, knows a lot of stuff. I think in this particular case, I don't know exactly where he's getting the information, but this is not how. It's just not how it works.
I'm almost certain it's wrong, and it's assuming it is wrong. Very detrimental advice if anybody follows it.
Yeah, you
because the
always
advice
want
is
wish
essentially
lists. Always.
Yeah.
Any wish list is good.
Get it when you can. Just
more
get 'em.
wish list, the better. Is I think that is the truth. But the other there's a bit of this too that's also important. There's a nuance here, which is that even if it were true, it's not. You shouldn't be taking any action related to it, right? Because if it were true, the rationale here would be to say, like, if you could get the same wish list from a particular user now versus in the future, that you should try to get it in the future instead, right? You don't have control over that. You don't have control over like when a person's going to see a post that you put up, when they're going to see anything, right? When they decide to wish list it, when they see it on Steam, you don't have any control over that. You can try to get people to see stuff, and you can try to get it in front of them a bunch of times, right? And what we have found is even via our most effective means of communicating with people, which is our newsletter, that our conversion of our newsletter recipients to wishlisters is like a flat thing. Like every time we send a newsletter, roughly the same number of people end up wishlisting the game, right? And so if we try to do all of that like later on, then
Save it and try to do it all the month before launch.
Yeah,
Like,
we
we're
would've
just going
had
to
it-
miss. We're just
we would have had a
miss
tenth
our
as
wish list.
many people wishlisting the game, right? Because the best thing to do is get stuff in front of people as many times as possible so that they have a chance to not only see it, because almost anywhere you show people stuff, you're crowded out by other stuff too. Whether it's an email inbox from a newsletter or, Twitter or Steam store page, whatever, the chances of any one person who would wishlist it seeing it at that moment are really low. So you want the most moments you can possibly get. So you don't have control over this, even if it were true that this is how this stuff worked.
Yeah, it wouldn't be useful information.
It wouldn't be
if
useful. You
true.
couldn't take an action based on that because you're better off having twice as many wish lists as you are having half as many shoved up to the beginning. Because if there is an effect here, it doesn't look like there is, but if there is, it would then be small enough to not look like there is, right? And so
Yeah,
you're better off
importantly-
getting more wish lists.
Yeah, and Steam itself does not care. So I think I'm pretty sure Steam had this. They put out this post about like how some of the store stuff works, and I'm pretty sure this is one of the things they debunked in it. It's just like some of the stuff about wish lists and how they play a role in the algorithm. I couldn't find the exact.
Well, actually, and their debunking is actually that your wish lists have less of an impact just than you think. Period.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not that like old wish lists are good, recent ones are bad, whatever. And there is some stuff that like there's a lot of uncertainty. It's all black box stuff, right? So all we know is whatever Steam is willing to say, and then we just have to assume that that's actually true because it could also be a Steam spokesperson says the wrong thing, right? But there's nothing about any of the data that exists out there that suggests that this is true, which is I think the most important.
But I will say there is an interesting effect though, which is that once you have a game launched, one is that your launch week for your game is likely to be the biggest point of wishlist ads for your game, like in its history. Because that is the point at which the game actually, because it's able to be sold on Steam, gets the most visibility that it's had by Steam itself, by the algorithm.
That's when Steam shows it to the most people they're ever going to show it to.
Yeah. So you're typically at launch, you're going to see just a massive spike of wishlists at the same time, ideally that you're getting a conversion of the existing pocket you have. But interestingly too, every time we do a sale, so Crashlands 2 has like a couple 100,000 outstanding wishlists, right? Still.
So does Crashlands 1.
And so does Crashlands 1. The number doesn't really go down much because every time there's a sale, a bunch of new ones get added, a portion of them get converted, and a bunch of them get deleted too. Because essentially a sale is also someone being basically alerted that the game exists and that it's on their wish list. So naturally you see these points where there's always this kind of churn in the background on your on your game and through a wish list system, right?
Yeah.
But it's because to Adam's point, it's impossible to actually control like a particular person when they would be exposed to it, getting them at the exact right time where they like have the pocket money and they're interested in it, maybe their friends playing it. Like you can't thread those needles. And so you just got to play it's just a statistics game, right? You can't really mess with that.
And there has been some evidence, or at least that people have thought at various points in time, and I think Valve has pseudo confirmed also at various points in time that for things like say Next Fest or other kinds of, or like preparing for a release and like those really proximal to an event kinds of moments, that velocity of some stat, whether it's wish lists, whether it's store page visits, whatever it is, that velocity at certain points in time does seem to have an impact. But that's not the same thing as like this like kind of constantly diminishing return concept. That's more about like what happened in the last day very specifically, or what happened last week very specifically. And each one of those things, frequently Valve comes out and says, oh, it turns out that didn't work very well, so we just kind of stopped doing it, right? So there's an ever-changing aspect of the algorithms and like what Valve is trying to do that means that there's not just, yes, this is how it works, no, this isn't how it works kind of stuff, right? But I think it is just universally true that you do not have enough control over when you can get somebody to go look at your stuff to actually take any action related to, even if all this stuff was true, your best move always is to...
as far as we can tell,
again, it looks like it's not. But even if it was, your best move is still, at every opportunity that you can, get your game in front of people, get it in front of people, and push them towards wish listing.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of advice along the lines of like, just go viral.
Yeah, exactly.
Just get like 80,000 wish lists like the month before launch.
Right.
You're good to go, right? And it's like, oh, sure. I mean, that would be really good.
Yeah, that's true. If you're in that position where you can do that, then do that. Don't bother trying to scrape up every last wish list over the course of 2 years.
Don't even worry about it. Just go viral at the last minute.
Go viral.
We'll just launch that bad boy. So probably not. Probably not. We probably disagree with Rami's take on there. So,
but it's possible he knows something we don't, and somehow this is all wrong. I can't imagine what that would be, and I would love to see it. So if there's something we can be pointed to.
We did our research, but everybody else should do their own research. Come at us and tell us we're wrong, and bring the documentation, bring the paperwork. All right, next question comes from Young Padawan, who asks, do you fellas have any thoughts on stop killing games?
Ooh.
I know your focus is on single-player games that might be less impacted by the proposed practices, but I'm certain you still have informed takes on how it may impact smaller teams. Any ideas on what it would mean for the Rumpus backend infrastructure? I'm sympathetic to the consumer rights cause, but it seems expressing mild skepticism, or even just asking questions about the implications, just gets you yelled at online. Love the pod, thank you. So
I love how they ask the question and then just sort of duck out,
And they're like, I'm gonna throw this hot potato right. So here's the thing. We definitely understand and sympathize with the intent behind it because, like, I've experienced this. Like, one of my favorite games, WildStar, it's fucking dead. Can't play it anymore. There's been an initiative of people trying to like bring it back and figuring out how to make it work for years, and they still haven't gotten there yet. Unfortunately, it's just not something that we feel like we can talk about because we would love to dig into like the nuances of it and like all the different things going on with this. And it's all super interesting.
If you think of the things that are involved, there's IP law, there's really interesting
consumer
complicated
rights
technical
questions
stuff,
and
consumer rights stuff. There's the question because ultimately what this comes down to is like centralization versus decentralization as a function of how these things work, right? And like how do you go from a centralized model of how something works to a decentralized model, and can that work for all games? There's a whole bunch of really cool, interesting stuff to talk about here,
but we're not going to talk about it.
but we're not
Exactly. Put forth the question, which is that there's no.
There is no room for nuance in this conversation, at least at this point. So we're just going to also duck out of it.
Yeah. I think the only thing I'll really say on is that we do have a game that would be impacted, which is Levelhead, right? Because Levelhead has centralized data store. It's not because it's multiplayer, but because that's how you access levels.
It's UGC based, so you got to be able to download other people's levels and stuff.
Yeah, and so to make that all work, you have to have some mechanism by which you know that a user is who they claim to be, and you know where to get levels, right? And there are solutions to this kind of problem, like the whole internet, for example, because like websites have the same, websites don't live under the same mechanism. They're discoverable in some way. So there are ways to solve like all of these kinds of things, but exactly what that means for any given game,
it's going to be unique to that game, basically.
Can vary. And it's something that I have thought about for Levelhead is like, what happens if at some point we're like, shit, we can't support the studio anymore, or we can't support Rumpus anymore, or whatever, right? Something happens. And what would it
we'd like
look
to find a way to make it so that you can still play that. Right?
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, I've got some ideas in my back pocket of like high level, like what that could look like, but I don't actually know. And whether or not we actually did would basically depend on why do we have to shut this thing down, right? And that's where all the complications come in, because in most of the situations where we would have to, it's because we are so fucked that there's nothing like we don't have time, we don't have the ability even to fix it, right?
And we do, and as noted, like we make mostly single player games, and they'll have online components with like cloud saving and stuff like that, and we always try to set them up in a way where it's just not required, where you can play them offline, you don't need to log in. Like the online features are sort of a bonus layer on top that you can interact with. And we do that for a reason, because we agree with this kind of a sentiment that like it would suck to not be able to play the game that you bought and enjoy, right? So unfortunately we just can't really dig into the
fun parts.
Into the fun parts of this. Maybe 6 months from now, when people have kind of cooled off a bit. I don't know.
I think this is one of those topics that, well, actually, I think if you talk about any piece of this topic without actually mentioning the name of the thing, right?
You could probably get into it.
Then you could probably just talk about it, because then it's just like it's the moment you put the name to it, so people are already now in mode, then you can't just talk about it.
Yeah. So we're gonna go to the next question. Next question comes from Womp Pump Get Rookie, who says, in a previous episode, you seemed skeptical of the YouTuber Video Game Donkey's ability to break into the games industry. What do you think of the games he has helped publish so far? Have your opinions changed? And do you think other competitors could enter the industry in a similar manner? So I can't remember when this was. I want to say like a year and a half ago, maybe.
It was 2 or 3 years ago now.
So Video Game Donkey
Big Mode, which is the publisher label. The idea being that, he's a very good YouTuber. He's got tons, like a big audience himself, and so you could kind of spill that over into both the funding aspect of funding smaller scale games, and then also the marketing aspect, right? Kind of a rare opportunity from a dev standpoint of partnering with a publisher who actually is an influencer, right? Which is pretty nice. And so far he's done Animal Well. And then what was the second one called?
And they co-published some other game that I have.
Star of Providence.
Star of Providence.
Yeah. Which has been out since 2017. So I think they probably brought that into as like a back catalog game or something like that.
Yeah. So it was probably published under
relaunched or
somebody else, and then they kind of took it over or something.
Yeah.
It's a fair guess.
So Animal Well obviously did great and is great. So he chose well for the first one, certainly. Star of Providence.
And I don't know enough about the history of, because I didn't actually think that Animal Well had a publisher, because I had heard of the developer, like people interviewing the developer a lot and like lots of things about the developer. So it felt like a very developer first, like self-published kind of a thing. But that often happens with a small publisher where kind of the developer takes the spotlight, right? Because we thought it was like because Blatro also had a publisher the whole time who looks like did really good work, but all you really hear about is the stuff about the developer, right? So it's one of those, it's like, it's hard to tell. I don't know what happened. I don't know what exactly Big Mode's role was. Like, were they, or was it, here's some money and that's why it exists? And it was, and then they picked a great game so that they're not responsible for its success, but they're responsible for allowing it to exist, right? Via the finance part. Or was it like the success of the game is truly because of what that publisher was up to? And I have no idea. I literally have heard nothing about what the publishing aspect of that game looked like.
Yeah, it's just been 2 games so far, so it's kind of hard in that context to, there's not enough, data points to be like, the guy doesn't miss. You know what I mean? I think it seems like they've done well, and they're both smaller scale projects. So it's smart as far as the business side of it. It's not overdoing it,
That's always kind of our position on publishers, is like, oftentimes you'll hear about a publisher and they have some, 1 or 2 really well-known successful games. And you're like, oh my God, they must be a really good publisher. And then if you go to their Steam page, and then it turns out that they've got like 40 other games that just didn't really go, right?
Yeah.
And so there's always this debate about, like, does a publisher make a game successful, or does a publisher pick games that they think will be successful and then just kind of offer a bit of support, but mostly just kind of ride the coattails of the game?
Right. Yep.
And
I mean, our general belief is that nobody knows how to pick a game that will be successful or make a game successful. Like,
but in Donkey's case, he's 1 for 1.
He's 1 for 1, which isn't a great sample size, but it is great. Yeah. So I think we're basically left saying, well, we don't know. It might be working out. It might have just picked a winner. Might have caused that winner to exist and be able to do that again. That's possible, but we would need to see that happen to know if that's true.
Yeah, and I think to kind of go back to like why we would be skeptical of somebody like going from being a YouTuber into a game publisher, it mostly just comes down to like, they're just completely different things.
They're unrelated. Yep.
And kind of in the same way that there's this guy Bellular who did a lot of, I think he still does a lot of Warcraft and like Blizzard related videos. And he started his own game studio because, he basically made a career out of criticizing everything that Blizzard did.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, he gets this idea of like, I know what's good and bad in games. I should make one. And the thing is, like, he's correct a lot of the time. He's also overly negative other times because he needs clicks, right? And he did end up making a game and launching it, and it did like okay. Like it didn't really take off, or it didn't kind of like blow anybody's minds specifically. But it was like a pretty good game. But the issue that he then kind of had was that he was trying to use his existing platform to talk about his game.
Yep.
And
that's not why
that's not why people were there. And it starts to become this like self-promotion thing.
That people hate that
people don't like, right?
Yeah.
And that was partially what we talked about, I think, with Video Game Donkey too, which is like, he's not going to be able to sort of like leverage his platform fully to like plug the games that he's publishing, because now there's a conflict of interest there and people can pick up on that. Right. And so it's a very difficult thing, like line to walk, but he has successfully published a game and it did well. So, good on him. He's walking it. So,
yep. So we'll see if it can continue. That'll be the next question.
We will see.
So I guess what I would say is I'm still exactly as skeptical as I was before, but
But that's true of all publishers. Like you should be
true of all
like
publishers,
every
yeah.
publisher has a hard time
Yep.
landing hits. You know,
Yeah, but it's now promising. I think my big question is because I think it has been 2 or 3 years. It's been a while.
Yeah.
My big question is where are the other titles? Why
that
is
was
there
actually what I
only
was gonna
one
get at.
title?
Just usually, if you're going to be publishing, you need to publish a certain number of games, like in total, because of this portfolio effect problem.
Yeah.
Which is that most games don't do too much more than what you'd hope they would do. If you're lucky, really, like you get like 100% ROI on something in the first like year. You know what I mean? That's actually like good in the indie space. And so if you're a publisher, you typically want to have some number of these bets going so that you have more swings at bat there, where you can actually be successful. And so, yeah, just kind of curious where the other ones are, because you really need a portfolio before you can make a judgment.
and it
about
might be
whether or not
coming.
it's
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and it takes a long time to make games, and it would depend on what role that because publishers also take different kinds of roles, right? Are they taking like steward the whole thing from beginning to end and are involved in production? Is it just the publishing part? Like, what are they actually doing there? And so I was expecting them to be more on the publishing side of things, which I think seems to be true for the 2 games that they have right now, at least. And if they're more on the publishing side, then I would expect to see more titles already, because then you can scoop up titles that have been in progress for a few years, right? If they're getting more involved in like the whole pipeline, then, it might be still another year or 2 before we start seeing that portfolio grow to any meaningful size. So
Time will tell.
who knows?
All right, next question comes from, we're just burning through these today. I like it.
yeah.
Just going. Next question comes from Star Whip Gobble Beep, who says,
These are the
says-
auto-generated names, right?
yeah, when
those
people
are
make
Rumpus
Rumpus
system.
accounts, we have a Rumpus name generator that you can use to make a sort of an alias for yourself. And I think it just gives you one.
Yeah.
And most
You
people
just get one out of the gate. And then so you also get a different one on Levelhead that just gets auto-generated. That way you can have a different name in Levelhead if for some reason you want to.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just get a random name the moment you do it, and then you can go change it to something, right? But a lot of people don't. A lot of people just leave
keep
with
it.
the
They're just
very
like,
weird-
this is me now.
Yep. I don't remember, how did we generate? Because we had a few name generators that we tried, and then ultimately ended on this one. And I can't remember how. Did we just
made
make up
it.
syllables and then just shove them together?
Yeah, like every first and last name is like some combination of like starting syllable, ending syllable.
Yeah.
And
So we had
had
to
to try
collection
to
of each, and
yeah, I mean, try to think through combinations that wouldn't be offensive or or upsetting.
Because
in
I
some
think
way.
because we started with, because a classic thing you'll see on the web where someone wants to generate a random name for you that doesn't feel like noise, just a bunch of letters or whatever, is they'll do things like take animals and like shove them together, or like adjectives to have like an adjective list and animal list and put those things together or something, right?
confused platypus 27.
Yeah. And we started with that, if you remember, but then we kept on running into cases where, because people use animal names or animal types as pejoratives for people all the time, that we just like couldn't quite narrow that list down to be like, do we have offensive stuff in here unintentionally?
How do you make a
Because-
non-racist random name generator? That's the question.
How do you
It's
do
very
it?
tricky, it
And
turns
the
out.
answer is you can't, because people are so crafty and so mean that you can't just take any combination of real words, no matter how innocuous on their own, and let them come together randomly. You cannot.
I think in terms of like number of slurs and non-slurs in any given language, it's like 50-50.
Yeah, it's
They're like
50-50.
even balance. So it's not great, but yeah, we came up with this random name generator that it does a pretty good job of not causing problems. And people tend to just stick with whatever name they get. We even have a lot of people in our Discord who they just like
Yep,
they
set
now
their
just
name to
they
it.
now just go by whatever Rumpus dubbed them. So Star Whip Gobble Beep says, how do you feel about making licensed games? If someone who owned valuable IP, Marvel for example, approached you and wanted you to make a game for them, would you say yes? For the right price, I'll do just as bad.
That's exactly.
That's usually the answer, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
But I think it's something we would avoid doing, as in like the price would have to be good, or we would have to be in desperate straits, or kind of the two places, because the amount of bullshit you have to deal with working with somebody else's IP can be, I guess, a lot. And so it really
You
like,
could
depends
just
on
say working with somebody else.
Well, I think
Working with somebody
Without
else,
the
that's true.
IP part.
But I do want to say there's an interesting note here, because there's a difference in directionality because licenses, typically the developer will pay for a license to use someone's IP. So, because essentially you're saying, it's really hard to break into something in the games industry, for example. You have a concept for a game and you realize like, oh, it would actually work. Like take Marvel Rivals as an example. Like, there's a concept there that you're like, oh, it hasn't been done in this particular space yet. There's a huge amount of IP. Maybe we could just like talk to them and see if we could set a licensing deal so we could just use all their characters and do some like co-promotion stuff with them. So usually the developer's the one who pays for it. Like, it's a really important note. Otherwise, you're doing more like essentially contract work, right? If someone was like, hey, make us like I don't know. I think we got pitched by Cartoon Network at one point. They kind of put some feelers out for us about like an Adventure Time version of Crashlands. Do you remember this? We had like a few conversations with Adult Swim.
Oh yeah,
years ago. But as we got into the specifics of it, it was way too hard to figure out how that would even work, in terms of like the art production mainly. Because I was just like, at the time, I was like, I don't think I'd be able to literally do justice to this game. So how does that work? And I think they were less looking for, if I recall, they were less looking for contract work where they would pay us to make a thing, and more like, do you guys want to buy a license? Does that make sense? Like, they're selling a license for it. So it's kind of a different thing. And like for us, it's just another one of those cases of like, would be hard to pick something in a way that doesn't just lead to overinvestment for us upfront, before you get a game out the door. So yeah, I personally don't have a lot of interest in it.
Well, it feels like these days that also most, even really popular IP, that whether or not a game can be successful, even a well-made game with a really public and famous IP, seems really hit or miss as to whether or not that actually pays off. So as a studio standpoint, like I would never be like, oh yeah, let's just go invest. Let's just go buy a license, argue with somebody for a year to be like, let's come up with a deal where we get to use it and we'll pay you something up front, some downstream royalties, whatever, right? Like the amount of legal negotiation that goes into something like that is just outrageous, right? So huge cost, top to bottom. So I absolutely would not do it. Coming the other way of somebody basically saying, hey, we have this game we want made, we think you could do it, and basically them paying us to do it. That's the model where I'd be more interested, but because those do tend to be more of just like, hey, we're going to pay for your development time to make this thing.
Yeah, you don't tend to get.
Then you don't capture the upside.
Yeah,
mostly. Yeah, so usually they just keep it going.
You're just on the treadmill. You're just buying time.
Yeah, because then once that thing is done, you're basically right back where you were, which is still not bad, right? Because you got to survive another year or two or whatever, but while you were making it, right? But then you're just right back where you were. And so if where you were was in a rough spot, well, now you're back to being in a rough spot again, right? And so then you have to do it again. And so what we tend to see is that when studios start doing that kind of work, that's the kind of work they're doing now, because
it's really
they're now like
they're stuck. It's a trap.
Well, also because the games last, just to the point we were talking about earlier, they last kind of forever now. So, if you're working with one of these teams and they've contracted you for, I don't know, for making some particular version of a game for an IP that they own, then, what happens in 2 or 3 years, it's like you probably having a license, you probably have as part of the contract some ongoing
support,
at least maintenance thing, if not, kind of revenue targets and stuff like that. So it becomes very tricky. I think if you work within a larger studio that manages this stuff, like that is one of their things, then of course it makes a lot of sense where it's like, it's an interesting space to play in, I think, as far as a fun place to build games. There's like the Hello Kitty game, there's the Monopoly Go game, there's like all these really cool games that, it's not like the people who made the board game for Monopoly made they weren't the people who made the game, you know what I mean? And so it's like you have specific companies who angle completely toward that. And that is it's a neat space to be in, but it's much more like B2B and like really hammering out all these details about stuff. And yeah, that's a little trickier, I think, in the long run for a smaller studio like ourselves to bother with. So
yeah, but people find success doing it, but it's hard. And like you already have to have some kind of a track record to even get those kinds of deals in the first place, so it's a hard gig to get into, but it is also one of those too, like once you do get into it, if you can deliver successfully, then in those relationships, it also tends to be less true that you get, if you make such a game and it flops, right? But you did a good job making it, then there's a good chance you can still get work, right? Which if you're an independent studio making your own game and it flops, and then you want to use that to make the next game, now you can't, right? So they're totally different business models, different pros and cons, different risks, right? And the stuff that's associated with it, though, for us is just, it's a lot of like, you just don't have enough control, and we like having a lot of control over what we're doing.
Yeah. But again, it's all about the price. You know, like there's a certain amount of ass pain that is fine if you're being compensated.
Yeah, of course.
But that's even true with our own games, right? Isn't like if we because we've worked with Netflix.
Like why do we localize our games? You know, and it's like translating our games, as we've talked about in many previous episodes, is extremely complicated and takes a lot. And just like this, licensing question, it requires us involving so many third parties. I mean, if you look at the credits for Crashlands 2, most of the people who worked on the game are translators. They outnumber us like 10 to 1.
99%, I think.
Yeah. And the administrative overhead behind that, the legal overhead behind that, the amount of planning that goes into that. The reason you do it is to open up the game to more markets, so you can deliver the game to more people and potentially have more rolls of the dice for the game to succeed, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's giving yourself a trillion headaches in the hope that it'll pay off, right? And so, yeah, I mean, the same thing goes with any of these types of licensing deals, where if somebody came to us and they're like, yeah, well, we want you guys to make this game. We think we can make the game in 6 months, and it would give us 2 years of runway. We'd probably do it, you know? Right. But we do have to kind of weigh that against questions like, well, that does mean that whatever game we wanted to make next, in our own, for our own stuff, we're not doing that now. And then what do we do on the podcast, stuff like that? Because like we probably can't talk about this project that we're working on at all because it's now somebody else's project and we're under NDA for everything.
Yeah, and we may still have ongoing aspects of what, because like right now, for example, we got a few publishing agreements going with some other publishers, right, for Crashlands 2. Details once we are ready to announce them, right? But they don't impact most of our podcast listeners. But so like we got these things in the works that require a whole bunch of business stuff and require our QA team to be like working on some new builds, requires, Sure, who does all of our platform management stuff, to be integrating SDKs, working with them to do stuff, requires me to dip into like the Rumpus code to like tweak some stuff here and there, right? And all that kind of stuff still has to happen, even if we're working with, even if we're like primarily responsible for some other title, right? And so there's all this like really careful negotiation you have to do to figure out like how to make sure that we get to keep doing the stuff we have to do while working on somebody else's thing, and them not feeling like we're using their money for our stuff. And like it gets kind of hairy, right, pretty fast. But it's all manageable. I think of it the same way that I think of like we get constant solicitations, which presumably are mostly scams, but probably some of them are real. To be like, hey, we got some money floating around, and we would love to buy your studio, And when they do that, I'm like, my response is instantly like, first, probably scam, but second, even if it's not, they are not willing to buy it for how much we're willing to sell it for, right? I know without a doubt, because the value to us is higher for a lot of reasons than the value is going to be to any company, right? And I kind of have that same assumption with pretty much any work for hire kind of stuff that would come our way, is that the amount somebody would want to pay us to do it is not something we would say yes to, right? Probably, period.
All right, next question comes from Buttermilk Love Nugget. This is pretty simple. It's pretty simple. That's not from our name generator.
Sounds like it could be, though, as far as the syllable count goes,
This question is Quadropus Rampage 2. Next? That's the question. So we've already talked in the previous episode, we talked about how we're going to be releasing or planning on making How Many Dudes as our next game. So let's talk about Quadropus Rampage. So Quadropus Rampage is from 2013. It's the second game we ever made. We made it as a free-to-play mobile game. I think it's got 2 million players. I think it hit something like that.
I think at least.
Yeah,
I know it was over one. I think like the number I always want to say is 1.2, but I've been saying that for like a decade. So I'm pretty, and that was just on Android, I think. So
might be old news.
So I'm pretty sure we're up in the above 2 million figure.
Yeah. And we made that game for the 7-day roguelike challenge after we released our first game, Tau Fight 2, The Monocle of Destiny. And we worked on it for 3 months and then released it and started getting some traction. We couldn't quite figure out how to make decent money off of it because it was our first like free-to-play game with microtransactions and one of our only games with microtransactions. I think we worked on it for another 3 months trying to, like, we updated it and we tried to figure out.
Yeah. Trying to figure out how to make it sustainable for us. Because at the time it was
we had a
just
lot of jokes back then about doubling our revenue in half because
we'd have great ideas. And
we'd always read stuff about like, oh yeah, like this game did this and it doubled their revenue and blah, blah, blah. And so like we would try some of those things. And every time we did one of those things, we just cut our revenue in half.
Yeah. We just couldn't get it to go. And I don't know if that could have started pushing us away from free to play in the first place, to be honest.
Free to play is not like a lot of it's
not
gross,
fun to
that's
work
true,
on.
but it's not easy either.
Yeah,
like
it's really hard.
Even if you're doing the grossest stuff possible, it's not like by virtue of being gross, that's what makes it be successful, right?
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of gross stuff you could do to like make it more likely, but almost no free to play games, no matter what they're doing, are in any way, shape, or form successful. It's very, very rare and very.
So I think
hard.
a lot of it comes down to the shape of the game, right? So we talk a lot about this, like basically a lot of the higher level decisions you've already made kind of determine how these things are going to shake out or how possible it is to do something like, in the case of Quadropus Rampage being like a dungeon crawler roguelike situation, how exactly you monetize that in a free to play space is just very tricky. Like it's just a hard one to do. Versus maybe something more like Candy Crush style, where there's a bit more obvious points at which you can like pull some levers for the monetization stuff, right? Without making.
But I think it's also though that like Quadropus Rampage wasn't designed with in-app purchases as like part of the core design. We made a game that was like, how do we put stuff in here you can buy, right? Which is
100%.
a very different kind of an outcome.
Yeah, and so I think if the question is like, would you take this game from more than a decade ago that even at the time couldn't make enough money to sustain even one person in the studio? Now the studio's costs are, 50x what they were back then because we weren't paying ourselves either. Yep. Would we make a
costs
second
are
one?
Low when you're not being paid?
Yeah, my answer is no. Just straight up no. As much as I like as much as fun as the whole thing is and like the undersea vibe and stuff, but no. It's just
it is different, right? Because like if we were to do it, right, it would be Steam first, not mobile first, because mobile's
rough these days.
I'm willing to say mobile is dead. I wasn't willing to say that until very recently, but
just now.
Mobile's rough.
For premium titles that aren't doing subscriptions.
I think for free to play too. I don't believe anybody's making any money on, except for the people who have been for the past.
Have always been making money.
There are people making a lot of money in there, but I think it's still
the same people.
It's so tricky.
Yeah. It would be a Steam first title. So Quadropus Rampage 2 then would be Steam based. We'd get all the fun that comes with being able to do that. Personally, I would love a Quadropus Rampage 2 in the same way that I'd love to have Crashlands 2, right? Like I already know what it is and I love it. And I would love a better, more, fleshed out modern version of it, right? The question is that also how it would be handled for players? 'Cause would players who loved Quadropus Rampage 2, who are all on mobile, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And played it for free, so they're not necessarily people who are willing to spend money on games, right? Are there enough people there to like, because there's a bunch of them, there's a large absolute number of them, right? But are there enough of them there that like they see a large number of people on Steam would be like, oh, hey, Quadropus Rampage, I also love that game and would love to pay for and try out a cool version of it.
This is like one of those infuriating things about platforms because we could not, under any circumstances, reach out to everybody who has played Quadropus Rampage.
Yep.
Yeah, we cannot. There's no means by which we could be like, here's here's Quadropus Rampage 2. Anybody who's ever played this, even though of course you use your Google account, use your Apple account to get these things. So technically, the linkage is there, but we're not allowed to do that or touch that. So a big part of the hesitancy with doing these sequels that are essentially like doing it on another platform, or even doing another one, frankly, on Android or iOS, like Apple Arcade or something like that, is just the fact that, we had or have an audience there in the millions, but we cannot reach
do anything with it.
So
Yeah.
doing a sequel.
Well, and then that kind of then brings us back to the types of stuff that we've been talking about for quite a few episodes now, which is trying to make a game that hooks people in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the question. Could Quadropus Rampage 2 do that? Because, what we're saying is that basically Quadropus Rampage 2 would have to stand on its own on Steam. Like, it would. You have to assume that it's only going to be seen by people who aren't familiar with the franchise, don't know what that is. And the question is, could we provide the thumbnail and title and then like the store page and put all that together in such a way that we could actually find an audience there who would go get it?
Yeah, because back in 2013, when you had a game whose tagline was "Be a Quadropus, go on a rampage," and that was enough to get 2 million people to play the game.
Yeah. Sufficient.
And nowadays, I don't know if it is.
It is still an excellent tagline, in my opinion.
It's pretty good.
But does it create enough of that curiosity gap too? Or is it funny enough either way, like to get somebody to go to that next step, right? And
I mean, maybe, I don't know. But
it might be.
It also needs to compete against other potential game ideas that we have.
Yeah.
Because like these guys are saying, we don't think we can capitalize on the existing audience.
Yeah.
So it's essentially even though it's a sequel, it's essentially a fresh launch from scratch. And the concept or the premise of the game probably doesn't have a strong enough hook to just like summon a big audience, right?
Yeah.
Or to go viral or whatever the case may be. And so probably not Quadropus Rampage 2, sadly. And just like Adam was saying, I would love to make Quadropus Rampage 2. It would be super fun to make. It's super fun to work on.
Yep.
And maybe like if we do end up hitting some kind of threshold of success where we can just make whatever we want and it doesn't really matter anymore, then I'd be totally down to make Quadropus Rampage 2.
I feel like within our portfolio of games that we already have, I feel like Quadropus Rampage is like probably the most likely to be able to stand on its own because it's like readable in a particular way. You can kind of tell what's going on. And the level, like the ease with which we can show a joke on screen is also very high, right? Because there's so many visual gags with like the kinds of weapons, like the sloth stick and like the names for things that show up. Like there's a lot of Tech has a butt. Yeah, it's very visually fun.
Butts move units. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, it's very funny. I think visually it's easy to pitch. And, people do like underwater stuff, at least to an extent, right? So I think like space stuff, as we talked about in the past, is also kind of harder the more alien it is, right? Yeah. So I think of all the games that we have in our portfolio to like make a sequel of that did then have to stand on its own, I feel like it is Quadropus Rampage. But none of our games, as we're saying, were made first with the idea of like, what is the thing that we think people would be into? And instead is just like something like Quadropus Rampage is just, it's hilarious. It's funny. That's like,
it was just a thing, it was just a thing we made because we had to make a thing in 7 days and then it turned into a whole project, but
our thinking has evolved from what would we like to work on to what would we like to play to then what would people like to play. And now it's, what would people actually even fucking pay attention to?
Because just moving up the funnel, right? Up to the top. Where it's
like you got to make a game that's good and that's fun to play and that people like. But if the elevator pitch isn't there, then you've already lost. Yep. So, all right, I think we got time for one more question, and this one we could probably dig into a little bit. This comes from Jumpy Lumpa Leapy though, who asks, do you see yourselves as having a holistic approach to life? If not, what would you call it? Is there a specific time or event that you could point to when you started having your current view or approach? This is a little opening.
Holistic.
So I guess so I think there's like a there's one easy interpretation of this, which is like along work-life balance kind of a dimension, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
As because for a lot of people, you've got your work life and you've got your home life, and then also for a lot of people within your home life, you've got like your life with like the different parts of it. And you've got like your hobby part of the life, you've got your family part of the life, right? And so I think the way that I would think of this is just how integrated is all of that stuff, right? And I would say for me, I would say to the max, as in like I just have life, and then there's a bunch of stuff going on in it, and I don't really think of them as separate.
Parts aren't particularly. There's not clear seams on all the parts, basically.
Yeah, it's kind of like timing. It's like when am I doing certain parts of it is a little structured. Actually, it's highly structured, right? Because it's like the time where I'm mostly doing work related stuff is between these hours of the day, 5 days a week. The time where I'm mostly doing this other kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of time-based structure to it, but to me, there's no additional kind of structure going on. There's no additional separation. Like my mind isn't in a different place when I'm in these different contexts. Mm-hmm. So for me, I would say extremely holistic. And I think that's kind of how I've always been, but with the kind of caveat there that what was like the most important aspect of what my life was up to has right now it's very spread out, like work related stuff, family related stuff, just enjoying my time related stuff. Like all that feels very even to me these days. And historically it was like very much work kind of focused, where like that was what I was thinking about most of the time, even while I'm doing other stuff. That's where my kind of prioritization went to, right? Was all of that. But even still, I didn't feel like it was separate from my life. It was just kind of like where I was primarily putting my energy. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the question for me is kind of also maybe getting at how the different parts of your life relate to one another, not just in terms of like your priority or your time spent, but if they crosstalk, Yep. And I think, because I have a similar feeling, I think to you, Adam, which is basically that life feels very integrated, but I think it's also kind of blendy in a way that I don't necessarily like. I wouldn't say it's the best way to do it is to have everything fully integrated all the time. There's this idea like with the working from home thing that people have been doing since COVID in particular. It's just really interesting how once you're working from home, a lot of the other stuff that previously was more like separately binned, because you had to go to work or whatever else, it's just in there. So you might be doing laundry, at like a random time of day that normally you just wouldn't have the capacity to do it. But now you're doing laundry. You can kind of always be doing everything. You know what I mean?
Well, and also you could always be guilty about not doing things. Because,
yes, exactly. And so
you always got the time.
Yeah. And so I think what's been interesting is, working from home, got two young kids, trying to support my wife who's managing them during all the work days and stuff. I think at this point in my life, probably it feels like a lot of pressures just on every part of the system, to be honest with you, as far as the work pressure is high because our team is very big, which means, big to me, which means we need to make sure that we don't fuck it up,
Our team is big enough to be expensive.
Exactly. So big enough to be expensive. And then, running the home life thing it's like the same kind of boat, which is like, it's a big enough operation now. There's a lot of people in the mix, which is great. It's all very full. It's a very, very full sort of experience, which I wouldn't trade for anything. But I think there's sort of like, with regards to the question, I think previously I always thought that like full integration of like all these different parts was what people were talking about with regards to like kind of a well put together life or like holistic life. I think there's kind of a difference between things being kind of diffuse and all mixed together, which I think just happens a lot these days with remote work, and things being like well integrated along like very good structural and organized lines where you feel like you're able to thrive in each one of those kind of bins to the degree that you need to be, and be performing to the degree you need to be. So I think so much of it is just kind of life phase dependent too. I think, Adam, to your point about like feeling like we were just working constantly. It's like, yeah, I mean, since we started the studio, basically, it felt like everything was just so oriented toward that. And it, I don't know if it's true that it's shifted in terms of priorities. Like, away from that, or if it's just that we've gotten older and so it's just a more balanced approach because you recognize that it's generally better to get rest.
Right. Because like we're not sitting on a hoard of gold, like we haven't had a runaway hit, right? We're still working for a living, right? And so yeah, my in terms of like making sure that something has priority, like for me still until we're independently wealthy, if we get so lucky as to get there, right? Then work has to take priority because because it's the requirement to make everything else happen. But
put food on those families.
Yeah. But my attitude towards what that means is what's kind of varied over time, right? And I think for me, part of it was like really coming to terms with the reality of the situation of the kind of work that we do, especially as people running a studio, which is that there's a never ending to-do list of things that we could and should be doing, right? There's no such thing as being done. I've never been done since the time we started the studio. There's never been a single moment where I was like, yep, okay, I did it, right?
Being done just means you're starting the next thing.
There's just the next thing to do, right? Yeah. And I think in the earlier days that created this like constant pressure of like, well, then if there's always more to do, then the more I can do, the better. Right?
Yeah, it was sort of like try to move through it as quick as you can because there's just some more stuff.
There's just so much. And now I've kind of like flipped almost the opposite, but in a way where I'm still doing stuff, right? But almost the opposite where I'm like, like the more stuff I do, the more stuff I do, the more just stuff there is to do. And so what matters most is like, can I move the things ahead that really need to be moved ahead in a timely enough fashion that we can keep everything afloat, right?
100%. I do think,
and now I think about it that way rather than just like trying to do as much as possible. And I think switching my mindset from doing enough in the current time frame, right, versus doing enough relative to there's always more I can be doing. It's an infinite ever growing list. Yes. Like that's what allowed me to fully like integrate everything.
That's true. I think
more holistic.
I think that's a good encapsulation of what I feel like the experience has been from like the 20s to 30s. Which is the combo realization that there's just infinite stuff to do. And so really what you want to do is take enough time picking the things that you're doing, right? Because you could always be doing something else, not even just more, but just something else, right? That may have paid off better or pushed you further along a track, and recognizing that like every one of those projects you do is moving you somewhere, right? Which is good in the sense of like it kind of doesn't matter what you pick, but also bad in the sense that if you don't plot a long enough course in front of you and then choose pretty strategically, that you can end up sort of flopping around quite a bunch, Spending a lot
for me, I think it's that switch also over from like quality of the work experience from quantity of the work experience to quality of the work experience, where like what I optimize for now is just having the best and most efficient at the same time doing my work. So if I'm having a good time doing my work and I'm confident that I'm doing it effectively, then I have done my job. And now however much I get done, given those two things being optimized, that's what I got done. And then, and so I'll do that for 7 to 10 hours a day, but usually closer to the 7 side. And that's like, I have a commitment to the studio, which is like, I could go forever, but if I do that, I'm not having a good time. Right. Yep. So I go for like an acceptable amount of like my life goes into this part of the system, where again, I'm optimizing for these other things because I could optimize for quantity. I could do that in the past. I have, and all that does is make my own life suck and me as a collaborator just less of a good person, and yeah, maybe I got more stuff done. But the other thing that we've realized over the years too, right, is that in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter what you got done because whether or not it turned out to be useful is a roll of the dice, right? Yeah. So rather than just doing a million things, just again, like Sam was saying, try to just take a little extra time picking stuff. And then also just remember, doing less stuff doesn't mean you're going to be more successful either, right?
Yeah. And I do think it does make dice roll. It makes it so that we don't have, at least I don't have regrets generally.
No.
Like just in life, because I mean, I do from my earlier days, certainly, but like once I started thinking a little more, because it's like, okay, maybe with regards to Crashlands 2, for example, it's like, yeah, the art process with it is like more, like just far more elaborate, right, than anything we've done before. It produced banger results, but it is kind of tiring to work on. You know what I mean? So Sam's point about like finding a thing where you're able to just cruise on it in terms of the work mode. Like it's these things are hard to put together for me. You know, I got to animate them, put them together in Spine and all sorts of other stuff, and it's a lot. And so at the same time, though, it's like, yeah, it's turned out that it was kind of pain in the ass to do that for like 5 years straight.
Yep.
Had it been like 2 years, I'd probably be like, oh, this is great.
It's pretty good.
And even like working on any individual thing, about like 70% of it still, I'm like just having a good time. And then there's like, it's just a little too much happening in any one of them. And it's like, I would love that to have been different, but at the same time, strategically, the choice that we made was to try to push further into some of that immersion and some of the comedy of like having fun, nicely animated stuff and have the game just look better. And that just had a certain cost to it. And that was a choice that we made. And I just still think it was a good choice as far as.
Yep.
Well, you're always making the best choices you can make with the information you have.
I think that's,
to me, that's the main thing is knowing that you did that to me is like most of the battle. Like knowing that you did your best to make the best decision you could at the time versus looking back and being like, I really half-assed. Like,
because I don't think I don't think you always are doing that. I think it's just the case that like, you can be doing that with regards to some things. Ideally, you're able to do that with regards to like the biggest structures that you have in your life, right? Your work, your family, your like health and hobbies, right? But I think a lot of times your kind of decisions are kind of getting made for you in a way because you're not making them, right? And so I think as long as we've been lucky enough, frankly, with how we run the studio for 13 years that we've been able to basically since kind of since the beginning, but also since Crashlands, then just decide strategically how we were going to move forward and then be doing that as opposed to having to just sort of like, we just like ending up doing something because we had to.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like
Trying to be thoughtful. Yeah.
Yeah. So the degree to which you can be thoughtful about how your life is being lived, I think is a big marker for success, you know? And I think along that dimension of like a life approach, I feel like I'm doing pretty good. Follow through. Maybe not there sometimes, but you know.
And it's true. I think we would be in a different situation if we were like at the end of our studio runway.
100%.
And like there are a lot of things that could derail us, or could derail me anyway, from what my current very well integrated sort of holistic life experience that is great and that I like. And it would basically take like a launching a flop, right, and not having enough time to recover or something like that. Or just with the current state of the industry, just not being able to get enough traction on each next release.
Or we hit 300% inflation this next year and our cash pile just goes away.
There are all these kinds of things that could put us in a situation where now once we're scrambling to try to like get something to work, then now all of a sudden quantity of work becomes very important.
We got to get on the grind and figure something out. Yeah. I will say I kind of interpret this question a little bit differently in terms of like what a holistic approach to life is. I feel like I have one. I don't know if I execute it the best all the time, but I think about it in terms of everything affects everything. So like, I like to say that if you've had a good night's sleep, you can do anything. And if you haven't had a good night's sleep, you can't do anything. 'Cause we've all been there. And I feel like that's super true. But the same thing goes with exercise and your diet, like the food that you're eating, whether or not you're moving your body and you're in decent shape, you know, like, there's that saying about how like, if you have health problems, then you only have one problem, right? Which is just that just gets in the way of everything. And so especially as I've started approaching 40, I feel like these things become more and more true where you just can't get away with it. Like you just can't, you feel it more when you fuck up your sleep and you feel it like, so I don't know if people noticed, but last episode I was a little bit stuffed up because I got COVID. I came back from a trip and got COVID. It's the first time I'd had it. And I'm quarantined, you know, so I'm taking my 10 days at least of not going out. So I haven't been to the gym in a couple of weeks. And oh boy, do I feel it. Like I can feel my joints just like getting they're sore and they hurt and they're just like stiff because I'm just not using them. You know? And I think for a lot of people, if you haven't really exercised or like done any of that stuff, you don't really realize what you're missing out on, because like if you just kind of always feel kind of vaguely bad, you know, that, but you don't realize that there's actually an alternative option.
There's that frequent post you see on social media that's, you know, along the lines of, I regret to inform you that exercise did indeed make me feel better, right?
It just does. I mean, and so often when people are struggling with certain things in life, then, and you know, they'll go to the doctor or whatever, and there's just like a set of questions that always comes, which is like, how are you sleeping? What's your diet? Are you exercising? Right? Because like, if you're not on top of those three things, everything else is just harder in ways that you can't understand. And it's hard to notice the ways that it's harder, but once you get on the other side of it, then you see it, right? But also on the flip side, like, I love going to the gym on days that I've worked, because I've put problems into my brain now that are just kind of like stewing, and then stepping away from the computer and going and just having some time to just like let it marinate, where I'm not reading stuff. I'm not like taking in new information
in, right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like working on stuff that day makes my gym experience better. Going to the gym makes my work day better. Like everything interacts with everything, and it is like an integrated holistic system. And I think it's important to, you know, just take advantage of that and like try to maintain all those different things, because it all gets better if you maintain all sides of it, you know? So I don't know, that's how I try to approach it. But of course you can't always do it.
No. And the feedback loop when you fall off it is really annoying, because it's one of those ones that just drives you into the ground, where you're like, oh, I didn't sleep well. You're like, oh, I'm too sore, I can't go to the gym today. And then now you don't sleep well the next night. And you're like, oh, God, I feel like shit. And then it's like, oh, well, now I missed out on this work stuff.
The negative feedback loops are, and even the internal motivation ones too, right? Because especially if you are trying to use like streak-based motivators, you know, like
streaks are bullshit.
Streaks are bullshit.
Don't even worry
get
about
off
streaks.
Of them. You got to get off them, because there's nothing more demotivating than a streak ending.
Yeah.
The only thing that really matters is your ability to get back in there. Like that's
the only thing that matters. The only thing that just matters is today. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I for example, I used to have like I tried to have a rigid like Monday, Wednesday, Friday workout routine, where it's like Monday is like chest and tricep, and then Wednesday is this. It's like, okay, well, what happens if you miss Wednesday because something happened? Now you're scrambling. You're like, oh God, I guess I'll try to go on Thursday, but then something else happens, and now it's Friday, and technically Friday is a different day than Wednesday in terms of what you were planning on doing. So do you shift it into the weekend, you know, and then the whole thing's fucked, because you've set up this thing to be based on a rigid cadence that's easy to break. And I started seeing a lot more success when I just started thinking of things as, I'm just doing a 4-day cycle where I have 4 different workouts that I do. I just always do them in the same order. And I just go to the gym whenever I can.
And whenever you go, you do the next one on the cycle.
Whenever I go, I just do whatever's the one that's up next.
You want low fragility systems, right?
Yeah. I think largely comes down to like flexibility is a huge driver of your ability to do something like this, right? Because if you don't have the flexibility, it's just like impossible to manage the reality of all of the inputs that come at you, I think, in life, you know, you're just by yourself, just your own health and everything else. Just a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. This is why like all my heuristics for stuff are sort of like, they're vibe based rather than specific, right? It's like when it comes to eating, that I just like try to follow Michael Pollan's food rules, which is just don't eat too much, eat food and stuff that's food, and mostly plants, right? And it's like none of those are specific. None of those are like, here's how many calories you can have, and like here's what not to eat, and you know, there's nothing just prescriptive about what that looks like, besides just biasing towards stuff, right? And I found that if I'm just biasing towards stuff, then it's just easy to manage on average doing better than I would otherwise, right? Because it's mostly, to me, a matter of like, my policy is always just doing something is better than nothing. And whatever you can do to increase the probability of doing something instead of nothing, whatever the thing is, then that's progress. That's good. That's the right direction, right? And the more that you can do, the better too. Absolutely, right? But you don't want, it's the whole like perfect is the enemy of good gets involved. Like there's so much stuff involved here, right? And so if you're just like biased towards good decisions that are not fragile and focusing on today and tomorrow rather than what happened yesterday, and the weeks before. And like, that's how you keep it holistic without getting derailed.
Yeah. And then you'll be fine. So just try to be thoughtful about what it is that you're doing and just acknowledge that it all does feed back into everything.
Yeah. And the fact that everything is slow as shit and there's no fast secrets, cause like
the feedback is not good. Like,
feedback is garbage. Real life. This is why I love computer programming so much.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Feedback is instant, but yeah, real life feedback is very slow. I've been, for the past year now, I've been doing nightly stretches because I've got some pelvic floor dysfunction. And so the amount of time it's taken, nightly stretches for like half an hour, right? For a whole year. It's taken a whole year to get me to the point where like the pain that I was experiencing is like dramatically lessened, right? And it took months to get to the point where it was like lessened. And it took a whole year to get there, right? This shit is so slow. And again, it's the whole like, it's better to have done the stretches than to have not done it. If I forgot to do it last night or I wasn't feeling like it, then that was last night. Who cares? Just got to do it.
You just got to get in there.
You just got to get in there.
Too.
That's right. You got to get in there and stay in there, which is a caveat I don't think we had previously.
There's no asterisk on that one previously, but it's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa Acosta, for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, Google Play, and the App Store and pick up copies of Crashlands 2, Crashlands, Levelhead, all the stuff that we're making.
Get it all.
And get on over to Steam and give how many dudes a wish list, because we got the store page up for that thing, and we'd appreciate it. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.